We are going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for a lively discussion on solar in New Jersey, sort of the past, present, and future. To get started, I'd like to just do some brief introductions here for the team. My name is Daniel Murphy. I am the Manager of Utility and Regulatory Affairs here at 174 Power Global. And I'd like to introduce my esteemed colleague, Corey Zucker, who is the Director of Business Development here at 174 Power Global. I just want to start today off by taking a very macro view of the solar industry in the United States. Starting around the passage of the first ITC, we've seen a tremendous growth in the solar industry here in the United States. As you can see, pretty much every sector, ranging from residential to commercial to utility, has all been experiencing, tremendous growth in the past couple of decades. Just wanted to highlight that. And then now we're going to take a little bit of a closer look here geographically. Where is this solar being developed, and what's driving the development of this solar? This is a map here, kind of just showing where solar is being developed here in the country, as well as just like a top 10 here for the states that have the most solar. When you look here, you can see, California, Texas, Florida, Nevada, Arizona, big states with a lot of sun, states you would expect to have a lot of solar. And then right after Nevada, you see New Jersey. And I don't know about you, but solar is not necessarily the first thing that comes to mind when I think about New Jersey. But they've really been a national leader for the past 2 decades. So we just want to take a little bit closer look. Why is that? What's been happening in New Jersey that's been supporting such tremendous growth in the industry? So just to give a little bit of background about, the history of solar policy in the Great Garden State. So the first solar-specific legislation in New Jersey was passed in 2012. So the Solar Act of 2012 establishes a renewable portfolio standard for the state, mandating that 24% of all the electricity used in the state be generated by renewable sources by 2021. And what this legislation did, in addition to setting an overall standard, they actually carved out a special section for solar specifically. So not only did the state want 24% of all electricity generation coming from renewable sources, that includes hydroelectric, wind. They wanted a specific carve out for solar. So that carve out was 3.4% of total electricity generation needed to come from solar by 2021. This was expanded upon by the Clean Energy Act of 2018. So what the Clean Energy Act of 2018 did was, taking that 24% goal by 2021 and expanded upon it. So the new goals that they've proposed in this in Clean Energy Act of 2018 were 35% renewable energy by 2025 and then 50% by 2030. There's a lot of things that went into the development of these pieces of legislation. These are economic drivers. So, developing the industry in the state. New Jersey is also a massive coastal state. So, when you think about the Jersey Shore, you think about the local economies. Those are all directly in the line of fire, you could say, from climate change. So New Jersey recognizes this and understands that they need to be a leader when it comes to developing renewable energy, not only for economics, but also just for the environmental health of the state. So now I'm going to take a step back. How does a state meet a renewable portfolio standard? How is this accounted for? So how utilities and governmental agencies account for renewable energy development are through renewable energy certificates, or better known as RECs. So basically what a REC is a tradable certificate that represents renewable energy generation. This can go towards, again, requirements to procure renewable energy, but it also allows for states to keep track and for developers to be compensated for these attributes. So a renewable energy certificate, quite literally, is equivalent to 1 megawatt hour of electricity produced. So for every megawatt hour produced by a solar system or a renewable generating facility, you get 1 renewable energy certificate. So that's how it's accounted for. New Jersey has a third-party verification system known as NJ-GATS, and basically it's a third party, separate from the utilities, separate from developers. So when you're developing a solar project, you register your solar project with this third party. They keep track of your generation, transfer those RECs to the utilities, and compensate you as a developer. So the first renewable energy credits in New Jersey began in 1999. So this was the first piece of renewable, climate legislation that was passed in the state. This did not have any specific carve out for solar, so why I didn't mention it on the previous slide. But just to give you a sense of the fact that New Jersey for over 23 years has had a focus on the environment and issuing renewable energy certificates. In 2019, to bridge the gap between the Clean Energy Act of 2018 and a permanent successor solar program in New Jersey, the Board of Public Utilities established a transition incentive program. So these were a stopgap measure to continue the health of the industry in the interim between the goals of the 2018 Solar Act being reached and the development of a permanent program. So how do RECs work in New Jersey? I elaborated on this a bit in the previous slide, but just to kind of go into more detail, how do RECs work? So RECs can either be, they can be sold, right? So you can sell them either to a utility or to another party who's interested in purchasing a certificate. But you can only do kind of one or the other. So, if you're a company and you have, rooftop solar on your building, and let's say, just for argument's sake, you generate 100 RECs in a year. You can either sell all these RECs to the utilities for them to satisfy their obligations, or you can retire those RECs, not sell them, and count them for your own carbon offset. But as I mentioned before, you can only do one or the other. So you can't double count. You can't sell RECs and then also claim them for your own environmental and social governance goals. So, you need to decide how much is a REC worth to you? What are your ESG plans? How aggressive are your internal goals? And what are those renewable energy certificates worth to you versus what are they worth to the utility? And just kind of continuing on that, in order for the utilities to meet the renewable portfolio standards set by the state, they need to obtain these RECs. So as a default, you always have the option in New Jersey of, selling your RECs to the utility because they have to procure them to meet their regulatory obligations. So where are we now? In 2021, the Solar Act of 2021 was signed into law by Governor Murphy, and this establishes the Successor Solar Incentive Program. Basically, what this is doing is incentivizing 3,750 megawatts of solar generation by 2026. So allocating the funding for the state and the utilities to compensate solar developers for that much solar. So this is a financial set aside to pay for this program. The way that this program works is that it's a two-tiered system. So what the state has done is they've created an administratively determined incentive. So that's for smaller projects, projects that are 5 megawatts DC and under. So as you can see to the right, this is a chart that basically outlines, depending on what type of project and what size project you have, what your REC value will be for a megawatt hour of generated electricity. So they make a distinction between projects that are under 1 megawatt and projects that are between 1 and 5 megawatts. So larger projects get less money, Smaller projects get more money. Basically, the BPU is trying to accommodate for economies of scale and supporting different market segments appropriately. Currently, the second tier of this program is still under development. So the Competitive Solar Incentive Program, there's currently stakeholder proceedings ongoing for this program. So we don't really have a full picture of what this is going to look like. But as this takes shape, that's something that we're going to be looking out for as well. It's on here, but it's not fully fleshed out yet. So not too much more information to be provided there. But just to give you an idea, this is where we are. These are the REC values. These RECs are paid for 15 years. So if you have a solar project, you're going to continue to receive RECs based on the production of your system for 15 years. So now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Corey Zucker, who's going to talk a little bit more about the economics of solar in New Jersey.
Thanks, Daniel. So there are several factors involved when evaluating solar for a company. First and foremost, next. Okay, the energy revenue. So this is money you actually get to keep in your pocket versus paying out to utilities. Generally speaking, you are charged a rate per kilowatt hour. So the amount of energy you use measured in kilowatt hours multiplied by that rate is what the utility is going to charge you for your actual energy used. This is now money that by having your own behind the meter solar, you get to keep in your pocket. The REC revenue, again, assuming that you're going to sell the RECs to the utilities for their carbon offset versus you retiring them on your own for your own ESG goals. There is, depending on the type of project you have, will determine the value, and that is another driver of your ROI calculations. Next. Okay, federal investment tax credit, currently 26% for solar. Right off the top, if you've got a fairly substantial tax appetite, solar is an excellent investment. If you have $1 million system, right away you get to take $267,000 as an investment tax credit. And then also bonus depreciation and makers depreciation. You get to take year one bonus depreciation and modified accelerated cost recovery. Makers depreciation calculated through years 1 through 6. I'm not going to get into the details of these. This is something that your controller or CFO would have greater details on, but we can certainly help them insofar as understanding how these numbers are generated. So let's look at a typical pro forma for a behind the meter project. So in the upper left-hand corner, let's say for argument's sake, a company is using 750,000 kilowatt hours a year to power their operation. And they're paying 12.5 cents for that energy. Their typical annual energy bill is $93,750. Now going in and looking at that, a system size of 637.5 kilowatts will generate 749,000 kilowatt hours. New Jersey Board of Public Utilities does not allow you to overbuild. A lot of people say, well, why, I've got a huge amount of property, I've got a huge roof, I want to build as much as possible. It doesn't make financial sense, and they will only allow you to build up to what your actual usage is. So in this particular case, that system will generate 749,000 kilowatt hours, which is 100% offset. That system cost at $1.2 million. If you take that divided by the system size, the 637.5 kilowatts, it's approximately $1.88 per watt. Anything south of $2, that's really what you're looking for. And then the REC value. Let's assume for argument's sake that this is a rooftop system. On the chart previously, a less than 1 megawatt rooftop system in this particular case will receive a $100 REC value, which is on the higher side. If this was a ground mounted system, it would only get $85. New Jersey recognizes that there's a lot of roofs out there and they would love to and prefer to have solar on roofs versus tearing up ground to put a ground mount system. So on the pro forma side, 1 second. That first line, year one, the current utility rate, the 0.1250, that's 12.5 cents. That is your, let's assume that that's the company's current utility rate. You'll see over time that in the pro forma, we use a 1.5 escalator, that is industry standard, that you will see over time an average of a 1.5 increase in your utility rate. Some years it's going to be 0, some years it's going to be 5, but on average it's going to increase by 1.5%, which you see over time how that swells from 12.5 cents all the way up to almost 18 cents per kilowatt hour. Your estimated annual production, year one, that is the 749,000 kilowatt hours that system will generate. You'll also see that over time, that will slowly go down. You will normally see a 0.5% degradation in panel output. It's very minimal, but it's something you want to make sure that you keep your eyes on in terms of estimating a pro forma. Anybody who says that you're going to see the same performance out of your system year one and year 25, no, that is not the case. There will be some very slight degradation year over year. Next. So your energy revenue, again, this is the money that you would have paid out to the utility. That's money you get to keep in your pocket. The rate, the 12.5 cents times the amount of production, 749,000 kilowatts, that is $93,000 in energy revenue. Then next, REC revenue. So in this particular case, the $100 per megawatt hour, just so everybody knows, there are 1,000 kilowatt hours in a megawatt hour. So it's the 749,000 times $100. That's where that REC revenue column comes from. And to Daniel's point, this gets paid out over 15 years. So that's, in addition to your energy revenue, that's an incentive that you get to sell out to the utilities, which equates to another $1 million in additional revenue stream for your system, producing that kind of energy. Next, the ITC, the 26%, that's $312,000 off the $1.2 million upfront investment cost. Then you've got your federal year one bonus depreciation and your maker's depreciation. Again, for a company that has a significant tax appetite, these are big numbers. Next column. So now you've got your system cost and you've got your O&M. You don't just put it up there and walk away. You don't set it and forget it. You have to make sure that you maintain the system, generally remote, to make sure that the system is operating properly. You want to make sure that somebody's going up there annually to clean the panels, maintain them, make sure all the connections are working correctly. So this is what you can anticipate over a 25-year term. You'll also notice in years 10 and 20, there's a significant bump. That's because while the panels are fine, you know that the inverters are going to need to be replaced, usually around every 10 years. So you want to make sure that you have a good understanding of what your overall cost of operation is going to be above and beyond the initial system investment. And then finally, next column, this is your net cash flow. So on a $1.2 million system, year one, your actual net out of pocket is less than $500,000 when you take into account your energy revenue, your REC revenue, and all of your tax incentives. By year 4, this system has already paid for itself. And if you look at the lower right-hand column, your $1.2 million investment will yield a $2.9 million return investment, which is a pretty good, it's a double-digit IRR. Now, next slide. Not everybody has $1.2 million to shell out for a solar system. I'd rather use that money for other equipment. What you can do is enter into a power purchase agreement. And the way a power purchase agreement works is that the host company, would have the solar system installed, but the developer, can you hit tab real quick? Okay, so the developer is the actual system owner and pays to have the system built on the host company's site. Next, okay, so the system owner, again, the developer, manages, maintains a system, and then sells the energy, usually at a discount, to the host company. The rates are generally less than what the company is currently paying for their current utilities. So in this particular scenario, if you look at year one across the top, right, your current rate for the utility is 12.5 cents. The system's going to produce 749,000 kilowatt hours. So what you would have paid the utility is the 93,625. But in this particular case, the system owner is only going to charge you 9.5 cents. So for that same 749,000 kilowatt hours, you're only going to pay 71,155, which is a net savings of $22,470. And over time, you will see that for a zero pocket out of pocket investment, you'll save almost $1 million over a 25-year term. Here's the other part of it, okay? You are not the host company is not the system owner. They are the recipient of the energy, which is great. The system owner benefits by not only selling the energy to the host company, but also retaining the REC revenue and all the tax benefits. So this becomes a win-win situation for both parties. I'm going to hand it back to Daniel to take it from here.
All right, and just want to note here, I do see that some questions have come in the Q&A. Please feel free to continue submitting those questions, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So now I want to talk a little bit about, we've talked a little bit about the past, we've talked about the present. Now I want to talk about the future and what we here at 174 Power Global are looking towards when we think about the solar industry at large, as well as New Jersey specifically. So just sort of like a more broad solar industry thing that we are watching are the potential impacts of pending climate legislation. So as many of you know, there's some stalled legislation right now in Congress that would have some pretty major impacts across the board, across many sectors of society, but specifically when it comes to renewable energy development and combating climate change. So, first, one thing that we're looking at, the most important part of this legislation is an extension, a 10-year extension of the federal ITC at 30%. There's some step downs in the 2030s, but, having a clear 30% solar ITC through the rest of the decade, as well as a 30% standalone storage ITC. So currently, if you want to claim that ITC that Corey modeled out in that pro forma before, you need to have it paired with solar. So that really diminishes the opportunities for developers to develop battery storage, without that investment tax credit. So getting that would really be a huge game changer, nationally, but specifically in New Jersey, where there's some business cases currently for storage, managing demand charges, peak shaving, things like that, as well as, having, the resiliency aspect of having a battery. But the standalone storage ITC would really go a long way to improve the economics of batteries across the board. The other thing that we're looking at in this pending legislation is the option for direct pay. So Corey spoke a lot about tax liability and tax appetite in the previous slides. And the reason he spoke about that is because in order to claim an income tax credit, you need to have that liability. What direct pay would allow is actually, it would enable folks who don't necessarily have tax liability to get that ITC as direct payment, and it wouldn't be reflective of their tax appetite. It would just be a payment based on the investment that they're making. The last thing that we're looking at is labor standards. So part of the pending legislation includes labor standards. So if you're going to build a project, again, this is all pending, but the way that it's currently written is that if a project's over 1 megawatt, then there are certain prevailing wage requirements for the job. So that means people who are working, subcontractors, contractors, everybody who's involved in the development of the project needs to be getting paid a prevailing wage. And there are also apprenticeship requirements. So, what that means is that, there's going to be more good paying jobs, there's going to be more incentive money, and it's just going to overall be a net positive on the economy. Another big thing we're looking at in New Jersey is a permanent community solar program. So just to take a step back, community solar, it goes by many different names. Sometimes it's called shared solar, sometimes it's called community distributed generation. Basically, high level what it is as a concept is, if you have a rooftop or a solar farm, you see like big solar farms, there's no load necessarily that those solar panels are treating. So that energy is fed into the grid. And you have subscribers. So renters, people who can't put solar on their homes, if they don't have a home, if they're, like I said, if they're a renter, if their roof is shaded, they can still subscribe to a community solar project. So what that means is they would be allocated, a percentage of the capacity of the system, and they would pay a reduced rate for that electricity on their bill. So it basically shares the benefits of solar with folks who can't necessarily directly benefit from it on their rooftops. So in 2018, the Solar Act of 2018 established a pilot community solar program in the state of New Jersey. So the way that this pilot program worked is it was a competitive solicitation where projects would submit to the Board of Public Utilities and would be scored on a matrix that included how many of their off-takers were part of low and middle income communities. So that's based on income, based on zip code, and then also where the projects are sited. So, as Corey alluded to before, New Jersey prefers for solar to be built in the built environment. So taking advantage of existing rooftops, parking lots, things that are already not natural, right? But so, based on your score, you would get approved or not approved. So that pilot program went on for 2 years. It was supposed to go for 3, but because of the Solar Act of 2021, which mandated a permanent community solar program to be developed by the Board of Public Utilities, they did not do a 3rd year because they're currently developing a permanent program. So right now, there's 2 options that the Board of Public Utilities is really looking at. It's either a continuation of the current pilot program, which is a competitive solicitation, you bid in, you're not really sure whether or not you're going to get approved or not. And the other option they're considering is a walk-up program. So basically, if you're meeting certain requirements, so low to moderate income off-taker requirements, preferred siting requirements, as long as you meet a certain threshold of score, then you would just be accepted on a first-come, first-served basis. So those are the 2 options. This should be decided this year, so we should have a better idea of what the permanent community solar program is going to look like in New Jersey. But this is just kind of where we're at, where we're looking towards. Next slide, please. Lastly, I spoke a little bit before about energy storage. So currently, New Jersey has a energy storage goal that was established by the 2018 Solar Act, which calls for 600 megawatts of storage by 2021 and 2,000 megawatts by 2030. As you all know, today is February of 2022, which means that New Jersey did not meet their 2021 goal for 600 megawatts. Right now, there's still no incentive program in New Jersey for storage, but we do expect one to be coming soon. Because like I said, they've already missed their 2021 goal, and if they want to have a chance of meeting the 2030 goal, there needs to be some sort of economic mechanism in place for batteries to be incentivized. So right now, we're still in the works when it comes to an actual piece of legislation, but it's definitely something that we're looking towards. And that about does it for me. We'll now take questions from anybody who has. Please feel free to pop them in the Q&A chat. So I'm just going to open up here. All right. So the first question here is, are RECs from different states interchangeable, or do they have different values? That's a great question. So every state has their own renewable, or if a state has a renewable portfolio standard, because not all states do, they will specify, you know, where the RECs need to come from. In New Jersey, it's specifically stated that the RECs need to be domestically produced. So, and when I say domestic, I mean domestic to the state, not domestic to the United States. So yeah, so all of these, all states have different REC values depending on the renewable portfolio standard, the cost of energy, the sort of the ambition of their goals. You know, if you have a higher goal, those credits, their certificates are going to be worth more. Whereas if you have, you know, a lesser goal, they're not going to be worth as much. Next question here. Can I get credited for RECs even if I consume all of the solar energy that I produce? Yes. So that is, RECs are based on production of the system. It has nothing to do whether they're exported or consumed on site. Another question I saw, no, I'm not related to the governor of New Jersey. Okay, so yeah, 174, so we're a project developer. You know, we find sites, we develop the projects, which includes permitting, you know, construction, approval, all of the legwork that goes into, you know, registering your system with the state and negotiating all those REC payments. Okay, do we see any improvement in a federal ITC or storage or improved new NJ storage incentives? So yeah, so right now, you know, we're all kind of in this holding pattern, you know, waiting on Congress to, you know, do their jobs and pass some legislation. So, you know, it's really hard to say right now what the future of the climate legislation is. I think, you know, we're all aware that there are some external current events happening right now in the world that are occupying, let's call it occupying the mental capacity of our government. So, you know, we'll see. And I know everyone wants a better answer than we'll see, but that's really all we have when it comes to the federal legislation right now. I do think that, you know, we should be seeing some draft legislation soon regarding an energy storage incentive in New Jersey. You know, if you look at a state like Connecticut, which just recently approved a battery storage incentive program, the model and the approach that they took was to have, you know, front-loaded incentives, so capacity-based incentives to offset, you know, that capital expenditure of installing a solar or a energy storage system. But they also have performance-based incentives, so ongoing payments. You know, some other states have like demand response programs where the utility will pay you for power when the grid is the most strained. So yeah, so that's kind of what we expect the battery incentive program to look like in New Jersey. Again, we won't know for certain until legislation is actually introduced, but that's what we're expecting. So we do expect to have at least, you know, we definitely feel better about New Jersey establishing their own battery storage program since they do have these goals. How do you qualify a project from being accepted to being rejected? Corey, you want to take that one?
So one of the things that we do is, you know, whoa, are you getting a lot of, I'm not getting some feedback, sorry. So yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do is when we first take on a project, and I'm talking about 174 Power Global, you know, we will have our engineering team come out, do all the measurements, making sure all the electrical systems are up to code. We've got you know, we've done well over 100 projects within the New York, New Jersey, you know, tri-state area. So while there are several steps along the way, right? So it's being accepted into the REC program. It's being accepted for interconnection purposes. It's making sure that we get the right building permits and everything else like that. So we will do our due diligence on our end. But there will be times where, when an engineer goes up on a roof, or our structural engineers take a look and see whether or not, well in advance, whether or not the roof needs any work or if it's even buildable on a roof. We'll do the full engineering analysis to make sure that before anything gets done, that it's going to be an accepted project. How long does it take to construct a rooftop solar project in New Jersey? Well, that's a great question. Normally you would say, well, it depends on the size of the project. That's not always the case. The biggest drivers on our timelines are generally things that are out of our control. That is the Board of Public Utilities acceptance, the various utilities, whether it's PSE&G, JCP&L, interconnection. I could tell you that, especially last year with COVID, applications that sat in the queue at PSE&G for months, that should have just taken a couple of weeks to rubber stamp. And then of course, depending on each little, fiefdom, municipality, the, building inspector. So generally speaking, on a typical, anywhere from 500 kW a megawatt should anticipate around a year. That's just a reality check. Once we get all the go-aheads, depending on the size of the system, we can knock out in just a few weeks, our construction team. So I think that is all of our questions. Daniel?
Yeah, no, that looks like everything we have in the queue. I just want to point everybody's attention here. If you have any follow-up questions, or you'd like some more information, or you'd like to be kept in the loop on how things are developing in New Jersey, please shoot an email over to our commercial email here, and Corey and I will be monitoring that for anything coming in. And like I said, please feel free. We're here to provide information and to just kind of give everyone, state of the state here when it comes to New Jersey, what's happening, what's coming. And yeah, so please think of us as a resource, and feel free to reach out.